Welcome back. You're watching Business Plus. We are bringing stories from the world of business policy and economy. Here are the headlines we're tracking at this hour. Prime Minister Modi is all set to inaugurate the largest Boeing facility outside of the United States in Karnataka's capital city of Bengaluru today at about 2 p.m. And air passenger traffic in India will double by 2030 to reach 300 million from the existing 153 million. That's the word coming in from Civil Aviation Minister. And India will need additional 2,840 new aircraft, 41,000 pilots as well as 47,000 technical staff in the next 20 years, says Airbus CEO. He remains upbeat on India aviation market. Residential realty prices rise by 19% in the December quarter of financial year 2023, leaving home buyers in a lurch. And oil prices rise on Thursday as International Energy Agency with OPEC forecasts strong growth in global oil demand as cold winter weather disrupts US crude output and geopolitical tensions simmer in the Middle East. And all those stories we are tracking here on Newsline. With me is Kartik Malhotra. Kartik, hi.
Hi, Shweta.
The top story that we are tracking today is, of course, Prime Minister Modi's inauguration of that mega, campus, which would be, in fact, Boeing's biggest facility outside of the UK. What is the facility all about? What is the campus
outside of the
all
US,
about?
actually, the
Outside
largest
of the US.
is in the US. Shweta, I think, Boeing is not new to India. India is not new to Boeing, and this relationship has been on fairly robust for many years now. In fact, some estimates suggest that India's exports to Boeing overall contribute to about $1 billion or so. So India already has been a strong vendor base for Boeing. There are components made in India that are exported outside of India that go into Boeing aircraft and other sort of equipment that Boeing works with, whether it is on the testing or on the airframe design, structural design, etc.
So the engineering part of it.
Absolutely. So the engineering part of it, the R&D part of it, in fact, Boeing has had partnerships with multiple IITs and IISc in Bengaluru already. And just, I think, early this week on Monday, it was announced that there would be a Boeing components part and a maintenance plant coming up in Crude in Uttar Pradesh. Now, coming specifically to the facility that Prime Minister Modi is going to inaugurate today, this is the Boeing India Engineering and Technical Campus, right, and BIETC as it is referred to. This is, of course, going to largely be an R&D hub. Multiple, aspirations associated with this new campus. The lead among them, in fact, as per the government press release, is that this is actually going to promote the participation of women in the STEM engineering system, right? So you're looking at more enrollment of women, more participation from women when it comes to science, engineering, and those technical skills of math, science, etc. In addition to that, of course, there is going to be renewed focus on R&D. There is going to be renewed focus on job creation. Boeing in India, directly or indirectly, already creates about 6,000 odd jobs, right? Now, there are advertisements already to recruit people for this new facility. As many as 107 applications are out already, out of which about 95, 98 are likely to be in the city of Bengaluru itself. So, obviously, a further sort of accentuation of the existing relationship that India enjoys with Boeing. Given the fact that India already has a large order book, all airlines across India have split joint orders between Boeing and Airbus. But I think what Boeing still has to do globally is to come out of the woods when it comes to questions being raised on its safety and security concerns.
That is
so, while at one point it's good to celebrate the partnership between India and US, that partnership getting strengthened on account of aviation, on account of Boeing specifically, I think there is also this renewed focus that Boeing is trying to put on its own engineering, its own design, its own components, and making safety of passengers paramount.
And that is crucial to point out, because even as Boeing expands in India, it is battling serious charges abroad of passenger safety, or perhaps not having aircraft which are quite in line with what aviation safety requires them to have. Boeing CEO also coming on record to suggest that we will be looking at all these safety measures very, very soon.
That's right. So I think, there have been some measures. In fact, as many as 40 aircraft have been tested already in the US. Those inspections have finished, have concluded, and that report is awaited, right? Add to that the fact that now they have a former naval admiral who has been brought in globally at Boeing to take care of, these safety measures, which seem to have caused obviously great concern across the world. Now, that is an issue specific to the Boeing 737 MAX 9 fleet. India, and even the order book that stands right now, Indian airlines across the board have not placed orders for the Boeing 737 MAX 9. So you've got MAX 8 and you've got MAX 10. For some, strange reason, India has given the MAX 9 a miss, which is good. But I think specifically back to this campus, that is the larger story which is brewing today. The focus on India, the focus on India's engineering capability, the focus on India's scientific temper, the prowess that India displays when it comes to, use and deployment of science, R&D, all of that is going to be the focus. And this may not directly be related to building aircraft. It's not really a manufacturing plant which is coming up. It is largely going to be restricted to other components and other engineering services that go into ensuring that Boeing aircraft, like any other aircraft, are safe to fly in and have the best engineering in place to keep them afloat.
And I think Boeing will need those aircraft. In fact, India needs those aircraft. If you go by the statements that are coming in, actually a lot has brewed in the aviation space in the last couple of days. And I want to talk about the negatives later on. Let's talk about the positives. It appears that the air traffic is also expected to double. That is what Jyotiraditya Scindia is saying at the moment, to about 300 million passengers from currently about 150 million passengers at the moment. And this while aviation sector in India is cluttered, there are not enough pilots, there are not enough aircrafts.
Yeah, so I think, there's no surprise that more Indians want to fly, are taking on to flying and really using aviation as a tool or airlines as a platform to go from one point to another. Now, a lot of other data also justifies this rise in Indian air travelers. This comes by way of a rising middle class. There was a price report released last year. Recently, Goldman Sachs also released a report suggesting that India's affluent class is growing. Though, there is some quarrel with that definition of affluent class, because Goldman Sachs classifies affluent section of society as people who are earning more than 8 lakh rupees. And 8 lakh rupees today, given inflation, is not likely to buy you the same goods and services which it could buy you in 2015, because that was the base year against which this Goldman Sachs report really came out. So overall, if you keep that debate on affluency aside, the larger context is that we know for a fact that India's middle class is growing. There is more purchasing power. There is EPFO data that suggests that more and more Indians are getting employed in the formal sector, are getting enrolled as first jobbers in various sectors. Even though at the same time we are battling headwinds when it comes to IT and startups, which are losing people in hordes, not able to sustain high salaries. But overall, no surprise, given real estate, given SUV purchases, given air travel numbers coming in, that more and more Indians are willing to spend on flying. So this number doubling by 2030 is no surprise.
Quite in line with expectations, come to think of it, as far as India's, doubling of the affluent class is also concerned. But I think what is also concerning right now, as you pointed out, that not just that affluency which is in question, which is debatable, because the parameters that it takes into account perhaps are not adjusted to inflation. That has been a factor in the past 5 years. But also a question of, can Indian airlines or are Indian airlines even prepared to take on that sort of number? Because in the last couple of days, and this is when I think we should spend a minute talking about what has happened by the way of mismanagement, perhaps unpreparedness on parts of airline in the past couple of days, since winters started ticking in and north of India was in a very foggy weather condition, as a result of which lots of passengers were stranded in Delhi, parts of other airports in north of India. It appeared like Indian airlines are not just prepared to deal with that onslaught of passengers yet. Yeah,
I know. I think, it should have served as a learning experience for all airlines operating in India, the period starting 25th of December when we saw fog really rolling in, up until even this morning when it was foggy, right? So I think every year airlines and passengers both face this fog-like situation, and it is something that needs to be handled much better by way of experienced pilots, by way of runways being operational, by way of communication between airlines, the ground staff and passengers. So this is something that I think, this winter month every year almost rears its ugly head of us realizing that the airlines are not competent enough still and not experienced enough still to deal with these uncertainties which are induced by climate but mismanaged when it comes to ground reality. Now, specifically on preparing for the future, specifically on getting ready to accommodate more passengers and doubling of passengers up to 2030. In fact, the order book of all airlines out there suggests that airlines are definitely getting ready to accommodate this increase in passenger traffic. About 500 aircraft ordered by Indigo, about 470 aircraft ordered by Air India. Air India has started receiving deliveries starting 6th of December. Every week, one new aircraft gets inducted. In fact, just yesterday at the Wing Summit in Hyderabad, we saw the unveiling of the A350, and that was the first time that the A350 visuals, what the interiors of the aircraft look like, came into existence. That very aircraft is likely to fly into new destinations, including Ayodhya. So I think, with this overall order book of about 970 between these two largest carriers in the country, which is the Air India Vistara combined as well as Indigo, plus the new announcements that came in yesterday by way of Akasa, saying that it's going to, it has placed an order of another 150 aircraft. It says that, with about 1100 odd new aircraft likely to come into Indian aviation space in the next 3 years, 4 years or so, is likely to at least take care of some of the doubling of passengers by 2030. But like the Airbus CEO said, that India needs as many as 2,800 aircraft, 41,000 pilots, which means we will need more capital infusion by airlines, or we need more airlines coming into the Indian space to really be able to place those orders and have a fleet of at least 2,800 aircraft and have those additional pilots that are required to fly those fleet of aircraft.
Absolutely. And we have approximately, if you are to add all the grounded aircraft at the moment, data suggests currently about 780 aircraft operate with all Indian airlines.
Right.
We need about 2,800
Yeah, so 780, let's assume that all of those 780 continue to be in operation. The grounded ones also take to skies, and this new pending order book of about 1,150. Add the two, we are still short of about 1,000 aircraft by 2030 if the estimation of the Airbus CEO is right, and in line with the estimation of the Civil Aviation Minister. And then, of course, there's this whole ecosystem of enough and more pilots. Do we have enough training schools in India, or are we still relying on aviation schools in France and in Germany and in the US, where pilots go for training and typically come back or don't come back, depending on what kind of work visas they have. Absolutely. So I think it's a larger ecosystem challenge which is slowly getting addressed, one thing at a time. But I'm sure as airlines are placing more and more aircraft order and estimating more and more passengers to fly, they are obviously seized of the situation when it comes to shortage of pilots, and that also in time should get addressed. It'll have to get addressed. I mean, otherwise the only people who end up losing money are going to be the airlines, and we've seen airlines really go bust and lose money like nobody's business.
And we can't afford to do that anymore, because remember, India needs about 2,840 new aircraft, and you need pilots to fly those aircraft. Currently, we have just over 7,000 pilots. That number needs to double by 2030 and perhaps triple by next 20 years. That's the word coming in from Airbus CEO at the moment. So if you're looking for your children's career options, being pilot perhaps could be one of them. We're going to leave it at that. We'll be back after a very short break.
Currently, the industry is facing a lot of challenges as far as demand is concerned. Basically, the US markets has slowed down because of high inflation.
So obviously, diamonds being a dream product, something which doesn't have a utility value or is seen as a luxury. So that obviously goes off your shopping list. That's the first item that will go off your shopping list, especially in recessionary trends.
That lab-grown diamonds are not mined, and they do away with the entire mining. So they save up on all the environmental damage that is associated with mining, and of course, the mining cost, which is why they're even more affordable.
People that is impacted by all these recessions are the artisans, are the people who work in this industry, right? But I think lab-grown diamond has allowed them to actually use their skills in the same product.
This and more, streaming on world's first news OTT, News 9+. Download now.
Since the last 2 years, Khalistani terror groups are threatening Indian diplomats in Canada, US, UK and Australia. Investigations of these threats led us to the first ever abduction and killing of an Indian diplomat, Ravindra Matre, in UK's Birmingham in 1984. Our months-long investigation finally led us to the murderer of Ravindra Matre, who has been hiding in Pakistan-occupied Kashmir for the last 40 years. Watch our exclusive documentary, Murder of an Indian Diplomat, where we reveal the man who killed Ravindra Matre.
Stop searching, start streaming. Download the world's first news OTT, News 9 Plus, ahead of the curve.
जानना है तो देखिए, समझना है तो सुनिए, सीखना है तो पूछिए और कमाना है तो खरीदिए। जानकारी, सलाह और निवेश सब एक ही सुपर ऐप पर। पैसे का सवाल है तो जवाब है मनी 9। आजादी पैसे की, अभी डाउनलोड करें।
Why is the state not looking at putting an embargo on that?
As a Telangana person, I will not accept.
How do ordinary folks deal with this?
Welcome back. You're watching Business Plus. If you are somebody looking to buy a home this year, perhaps you'll have to be wary of the rising real estate prices. As of December quarter of calendar year 2023, real estate prices have gone up by almost 19%. When it comes to Noida specifically, it's gone up by almost 30%. So all major metro cities from Mumbai to Noida to Delhi have seen a rise in real estate prices. But what's also surprising is that people who were hoping to buy, the search queries have in fact reduced because people are now wary of the real estate prices which are going up. So perhaps not looking to buy, Kartik, in the next couple of months. These are crucial months. Prices are exponentially rising.
I don't know, Shweta, whether people will, I mean, search queries could, of course, reveal the larger trend line here. But the point is that what is the real hard data suggesting? The hard data suggests that flats priced under 50 lakh rupees are actually not selling in as much number. They don't have the kind of demand that flats which are priced higher than 1.5 crore rupees are selling. So overall, it seems that more and more people living in metro cities, in any case, I think in urban townships, in metro cities like Delhi, NCR, Mumbai, Bengaluru, etc., it's almost impossible to find a flat price below 50 lakh rupees.
Absolutely.
So what I make of this data and this trend emerging is that there is demand for real estate, there is demand for purchasing property in the more affluent parts of the country, which happen to be the job centers, which happen to be the metropolitan cities. And the top 10 metros is where I feel the larger demand for housing is coming from. And in those, finding flats priced under 50 lakh rupees is obviously next to impossible, right? And you're really going to go ahead and make a lot of compromises on size, on location, on connectivity, on infrastructure, and the entire ecosystem of housing if you were to look for a cheaper flat. And property prices have increased. Now, property prices have increased. That has been a trend which started rising during the pandemic again, where we saw that people wanted to build their own assets, did not want to live on rent, wanted to, in fact, and that really happened when a lot of folks who were living on rent, actually given the work from home options, had put their rental accommodation, had given up on their rental accommodation and had migrated back to their, to their hometowns and continue to work from home from there. And when they came back, once the economy started opening up again, and when they came back to their places of work, instead of looking at rental options, they wanted to look at options to purchase. And that led to this rise in demand, and then that rising demand with not too much supply to manage that rising demand met the equilibrium at a much higher price point. So what that resulted in, of course, was this gradual increase in prices, and December quarter seeing a 20% rise over the same period last year, pretty much suggesting that there is more demand, there are more affluent Indians wanting to buy houses, and there isn't enough supply which can match that demand. But what also happens is, usually the trend line usually, Shweta, is that there is an inverse relationship, let's say, between stock markets and gold. There is also a similar inverse relationship between stock markets and property prices. When stock markets are overheated, it's a scenario where more and more people are investing in the equity markets and want to participate in this bull run, and that is when other investments like real estate take a backseat. What we are seeing specifically in 2023, and I don't know if this trend is going to continue, is that despite markets being overheated, there is an equal, maybe a lower degree of correlation, but there is an equal surge that we are seeing in real estate as well. So for once, we are not seeing that inverse relationship between equity markets and real estate prices play out. Rather, there seems to be a more linear correlation. And while you see equity rise, you are also seeing real estate rise. Could this be linked to, the election season that we are getting into? I don't know, because there seems to be a bull run right now, estimating that the same continuity of government is going to resume when elections are over in the month of May. And is there some sort of a hedge that some investors, not real, folks who want to buy houses to live in, but are investors looking at some sort of a hedge in the real estate sector, could also be one, one sort of deeper investigation that can run. But the trend is fairly simple. I think there is far more demand than supply, and hence the prices are going up.
Also, since you mentioned that, it's very interesting because the Prop India Magic Bricks report pointing that there was an increase in searches by only 2% year on year, while the supply reduced by 16.9%.
Right.
So those numbers, of course, not matching up. Searches going up only by 2%, and existing supply is going down by as much as 17%.
So the delta of about 16-17% is what is actually resulting in the rise of prices. So it might not be more number of people looking to buy a house over the last year. That number could pretty much be flat, because once you buy a house, you're out of that pool.
Absolutely.
You're not searching anymore.
Right.
So it is almost the same number of people who wanted to buy a house in December 2022. The same number of people, absolute number, not the same people, the same number of people almost wanting to buy a house in December 2023. But the availability of houses is down about 16%, which obviously then becomes a seller's market, and they can take prices up to whatever level they feel justified.
And the most price anybody has to pay throughout the country to buy a house is in fact Gurugram. That number also stood out at 32%.
Look at the DLF houses priced at 7 crore rupees, sold out in 3 days, 4 days flat. So there are people who have the money to spend on houses, and that is obviously tilting the balance in favor of the sellers, not as much in favor of the buyers.
Absolutely. If you're living in Gurugram, of course, property prices soaring there over the year by 32%. In fact, real estate prices overall in the entire country going up by almost 20% over the year. But shifting focus to a global trend line that is now emerging by the way of oil prices, which dipped slightly yesterday, almost 1.6%, after International Energy Agency and OPEC forecasted that growth could finally pick up. There is demand coming in for crude, also on the back of the fact that the winters has halted US supply of crude oil, and US inventory of crude oil will take a beating. There'll be more demand from OPEC countries. All of that resulted in oil prices slightly inching up as of yesterday, but just this morning we're also seeing a fair bit of prices going down. So that volatility chart on your screens right now continues to exist. What are we making of what's happening globally, Kartik? Tensions in Middle East that are now fast spreading to other countries as well, with Pakistan and Iran now in fray, possibility of a war there, as well as the global demand that just doesn't seem to pick up. No recovery from China. Data points not very conducive of what's going to happen as far as demand is concerned.
Look, Shweta, I think, there is no doubt that right now the entire world is looking at the Middle East or West Asia, as it is referred to, depending on where you're looking at it from. And those those conflict zones are obviously playing havoc, at least in the estimation of how economies could continue to rise or stabilize, as the case may be. Now, obviously, US is a different story, because US is able to fulfill most of its oil demand from within the country, and there is the balance that comes in either from Mexico or from Venezuela. And Venezuela is the latest entry in this overall oil production nations which are exporting to other countries. So US is a different story. The demand that generates from US, from the OPEC region and from the Middle East, from the Gulf, is not as much as the demand that India and China have from the same region. India also has been able to safeguard itself a little bit from the volatility in the OPEC region because of the oil that we import from Russia. Now, those Russian discounts have also tapered off over the course of the last 1 year. Now, what is happening is that there are multiple causes, oil being one of them, which are likely to lead to inflation, and inflation more so again in India than in the West, because of the region and the conflicted region impacting trade, both India's exports as well as oil imports into India coming from the Suez Canal, which are no longer likely to continue coming from the Suez Canal and taking the longer Cape of Good Hope route. So ships could be on sea for, as much as 14 to 19 days longer. Some estimates suggesting even 21 days, depending on weather, depending on port availability, etc. Add to this the rising fuel cost. Now, this fuel cost is India's own sort of, benchmark is that up to about $85 or something, we are comfortable as an economy. The range of 80 to 85 is something we factored in. We had a good run in the month of November and December when prices had actually come down to about $75 and even below that briefly, and then staying stable at about $75, $76 to a barrel. So there was this profiteering on account of OMCs and then the windfall tax, etc., making sure that the government-run OMCs don't end up making too much money. So that has given some cushion to the government by way of windfall taxes to be able to offset the increased oil prices if oil was to breach the $85 mark. Right now, it is still looking in the range of about 80.
85.
Yeah, so I'm saying, with 78, 79, we're still looking at maybe, the resistance coming in at about 80. 85 still seems a little distance away. But overall, with rising oil, the fact that what the government gained by windfall taxes, which it'll use to offset if oil were to go beyond $85, should see us through at least till the election season, is my guess, right? But that is not the only, but that is not the only inflationary concern. Inflationary concerns also come from the fact that if exports become dearer, we will see fewer countries wanting to import from India. And if India's overall shipping exporters continue to be on sea for longer days, we are adding to every day of cost for the ship. We are adding to higher container cost. We are adding to higher insurance cost. And overall, exports do not stay lucrative for India. And this whole China plus one narrative could begin to get diluted, because China has got other modes of transportation, the land and the railroads and the entire BRI corridor, which does not pass through the Suez Canal. And that is where India ends up becoming collateral damage. So expensive oil coming in, expensive exports going out, overall inflationary concerns, India is not looking at a very pretty picture when it comes to these global geopolitical and geoeconomic uncertainties.
Okay, so two questions emerging at this point. Number one, with respect to inflation, since we are talking about inflation sustaining as opposed to what were initial estimates that inflation will cool off perhaps in the last quarter of this year, are we not looking at a rate cut anytime soon? Because with the US, that possibility has been passed on to the end of this year.
And in fact, this is what Shaktikanta Das said at Davos yesterday as well, and it's something that we had discussed ahead of him actually making that statement, is that 5.6% at which retail inflation came in for the month of December is still way above the 4% ideal scenario that the RBI wants to hammer it down to. It is still between that range of 2 to 6% and closer to the upper threshold of 6% coming in at 5.6, but it is still far away from the 4%. And it does not need to just come down to 4%. It needs to come down to 4% and stick with that 4% mark before we can imagine any sort of rate cut. So rate cuts definitely not on the anvil. And that is something that RBI governor has also stated categorically, saying that even if there is this pressure from US, and not that US Fed is going to reduce rates anytime soon, but overall if there is this buoyancy in markets in anticipation ahead of the RBI of a rate cut, then those are just castles in air, and rate cut is not going to happen soon.
And my second question to that regard, and this perhaps concerns most of
Yeah.
our viewers, are we looking at oil prices going up or down? What sort of trajectory are you expecting? Because in December, last week of December, there were talks that perhaps government will cut excise duty.
Yes.
Those conversations faded away once oil minister came on record suggesting that is not going to happen anytime soon. In fact, there could be something happening towards election, which is now just around the corner in the month of February or March. Are you looking at prices going up or down?
So that's a very important question. I think let's spend a minute addressing that. So what happened was that earlier this week, there was a statement from the government saying that the OMCs, and 3 of the largest OMCs are controlled by the government, the oil marketing companies, right, which are the final retailers who sell the fuel to us. And they have made excessive profits because of the oil prices that we saw in the month of November and December, coming well below the expected threshold of $85 to about $75 and even below. So OMCs have made tons of money on which the government has imposed the windfall tax, and due to which there was an estimation that we should be able to see a correction in oil prices. Petrol could be slashed by as much as 10 rupees, diesel could be slashed as much as 15 rupees as early as in the month of February. Now the situation has changed with the conflict zone expanding to Iran and Pakistan as well, with the Suez Canal, Red Sea continuing to be in trouble. The impact on oil prices is something that I believe the government will want to wait and watch before cutting down prices, because it'll be a very
tricky situation
it'll be a
right
bad political move
Absolutely.
to cut fuel prices in the month of February, and as you go into elections, to increase fuel prices
immediately after
elections. So my assumption is, and my calculation is, that the government will hold on to fuel prices right now. Let the oil marketing companies make profit. Let the country get windfall taxes by way of that. Don't tinker with retail level oil prices. Wait for prices globally to stabilize before taking a rate cut decision. But a hike in fuel prices in election year seems like a bad idea.
Very unlikely. No, perhaps knee-jerk reaction expected anytime soon. There could be one. We never know with the government. Remember, this is election season, so you never know if the oil prices, despite global worries, may just come down in India in the month of February. Those were the expectations in the month of December. That did not happen. But as we come closer to elections, it is getting very, very difficult for India to cut prices as global crude oil prices continue to see an upward momentum in the past couple of days. I think we'll leave it at that. Thank you very much for watching.
20,000 people dead and counting. What's happening in the United States of America is unprecedented. You will have to pay for this.
How do you fulfill that promise? Because ultimately